So today, folks, I want to take a little bit of time to rank the companion exits from the modern era of Doctor Who. Before we get started though, just a couple of quick things. First of all, our rankings probably aren't going to be the same, which is absolutely fine, as diversity in opinion is what makes it so fun to discuss in the first place, and as long as we're aware of this and don't take things too seriously, then we can all have fun. Additionally, I have to say that putting an order to this ranking was very difficult to do. My opinions are very positive on these companion exits overall, so trying to pinpoint exactly which ones I slightly preferred over the others was nearly impossible to do, but I have made my best effort to have this list reflect my genuine opinions, as difficult as that was to compile. I've also chosen to only count companions who are credited in the intro of a full series of the show. So, one-off or recurring companions like Jack and River don't qualify for this specific list. Sadly, this ranking will only include the modern era companions, as I'm still working my way through the classic series of the show, though rest assured I will include Classic Who in my rankings once I am all caught up. And lastly, of course, there are going to be spoilers for Doctor Who in this video. If you are not caught up with the show, then I'd recommend skipping this ranking, at least for now. And with all that established, let's get started in ranking the exits of all 10 modern era Doctor Who companions. Nardole comes low on this list not because his exit was poor in any way, but merely because it's the one that made the smallest impression on me. As he was never the main companion of Series 10, he was always going to play a supporting role to both the 10th Doctor and Bill, which makes plenty of sense in my opinion. Though this is why his exit doesn't have as much of an impact as most companions, because he was never intended to be that big of a character. But in terms of what we get, it is genuinely good. There's two main moments he has, the first of which being the goodbye in The Doctor Falls, which feels like an appropriate direction for that character to go. Having him help to protect these people as the Doctor goes off to fight the Cybermen, it is a nice place to leave him, and the final moment there is quite sweet. The second one comes in Twice Upon a Time, of course, where him and Bill get to hug the Doctor. I also really like this moment and consider it to be just a nice little beat for us to say goodbye to Nardole, who I do enjoy as a companion. It is once again overshadowed by Bill and her goodbye, but that's not a complaint of what Moffat chose to do. He absolutely made the right decision in giving the more important character the bigger goodbye. It's just an explanation as to the placement of his exit on this list. Graham certainly had a good exit from the show, but like a lot of other characters low on the list, I think it suffers a little bit from how overshadowed it is by another character. I don't take too much issue with that. It does make sense that Ryan had a bigger focus as he was the one who chose to actually leave the TARDIS, but that is simply my explanation as to why this one is where it is. As said, it's a good exit. It absolutely flows naturally from Ryan's decision and works pretty effectively. Of course, Graham is going to choose to spend time with Ryan, that's only natural, but the fact that he does have a bit of a dilemma about it is what makes this goodbye more interesting. He would love to spend more time seeing the sights of the universe with the fam, but ultimately the right decision is to be with Ryan and spend what years he has left with him on Earth, taking care of the problems and just living a good life. It's nothing incredible, but it's a lovely little goodbye that I am fond of, and I certainly appreciate that it isn't the same as the most recent companion exits. Rory has a similar thing holding his exit back to Nardole, and that is that he was never intended to be a primary companion to the Doctor. He was always there because of Amy Pond. It's kind of hard to picture him as the sole companion traveling with Eleven, because that just wouldn't make sense with these characters. And at the end of the day, what we get is a solid goodbye to a good companion. I don't love Rory, but I definitely liked him in the show and enjoyed seeing the places his character was taken throughout his 2-ish seasons on Doctor Who. And to have him, after all of the events of The Angels Take Manhattan, just look down at a grave to see his own name before disappearing entirely, it's kind of perfect. If you take issue with some of the technical aspects related to why he's trapped to that period and place of time, that's fair enough, but for me it's far more about the emotionality of the scene and the story than about the nitty-gritty of why he can't be saved, because we know that he can't. There's obviously a lot more from earlier in this story that adds on to the gut punch that is Rory disappearing, and what that does is it really makes his exit from the show that much better. As said, it is overshadowed, of course, by Amy Pond's goodbye, but I think Moffat did a pretty good job of making that moment meaningful on its own, and I'm glad he did. It was quite a good send-off for this character, though not nearly as good as the show's best efforts. Ryan's exit from the show was honestly really good. It feels like forever since a companion has had the opportunity to choose for themselves when they want to leave the TARDIS, so I appreciated that we got that again for the first time in about 14 years. The way that it's presented also feels very natural, and given that he was stuck on Earth for 10 months, I buy that he would reconsider his place traveling around the universe. He has had time to see his friends and settle back down, so it feels only normal that he now decides it is time to move on. It's very much a unique exit from the show, at least in its modern era, which I do appreciate because we don't see this often. It's also surprisingly emotional, to be honest. Seeing the shot of these characters giving a hug as they parted ways had me holding back tears. I also think it's nice that he gets to be with his granddad as they deal with problems down on Earth. It's not the saddest of exits, which is part of why it ranks a little bit lower on this list, because that's what I tend to prefer, but it's definitely a good one, and I like seeing Chibnall do something different to what has been done in recent years. Martha has quite a unique exit from the show for a couple of reasons, but the main one is that she doesn't die or have some significant event happen to her which forces the character to not travel with the Doctor, as was the case for basically every other companion on this list. She makes a very specific choice to stop traveling with him and to move on with her own life, and it's impossible for me not to respect that, both in terms of Martha's choice as a character and Russell T Davies' choice to have an entirely different arc with a companion. It's cool to see in the modern era of the show a companion who decides on their own that they do not want to continue traveling with the Doctor. He treated her rather poorly at times, and she said, "Enough's enough, I'm done, good luck on your future travels." I really like that because it is so different to what we normally get in New Who. So why isn't it higher? That's for a very simple reason. It's not particularly sad. I've said this before recently, and I try to remind those of you that are watching right now, when it's relevant, that I really like heartbreaking and emotionally resonant films, shows, and episodes of TV in general. One of my all-time favorite films is Room, not to be mistaken with The Room, which I love for entirely different reasons. The reason I love that movie is because it emotionally connected with me, probably more than anything else that I've seen in film. TV is an entirely different story, of course. So if an exit for one of these companions is able to be genuinely tragic and make me quite sad, then odds are I'm going to appreciate it more for that than something like this, which is really going for a different thing, because at the end of the day, it's all personal preference, and I personally prefer the exits that are emotionally resonant with me. Amy was the main companion when I basically first started watching Doctor Who. Viewing the show live wasn't really an option, but I do remember my older sister purchasing the Doctor Who Series 7 Part 1 DVD, which had just those 5 episodes with Amy Pond. And I recall that I had no idea that she was going to be leaving the show. I wasn't really on the internet very much at the time at all, so it had yet to be spoiled for me, and just seeing these companions leave the Doctor in the 5th episode of the season was shocking and completely heartbreaking. I do like the episode on the whole. There's a lot of things that work in it and just a few aspects that don't land, but the true highlight to this is Amy Pond choosing to leave the Doctor and spend her life with Rory. It's so unbelievably sad, and these actors do such a great job of absolutely selling that moment. It's also the perfect end for Amy Pond as a character. The ultimate test is to have her decide between a life with the Doctor and a life with Rory, and she definitively chooses the latter. And if you ask me, she made the right call. Rory is trapped on his own in an unfamiliar time in an unfamiliar place with absolutely nothing to his name and nobody to just, be with. The Doctor is going to carry on without these two, and eventually he'll be okay, but Rory needed Amy more than the Raggedy Man needed her, and it was very nice to see her make the right choice. Bill, to me, has a really great exit from the show, and the thing that puts it just the tiniest hair above the previous entry on this list, at least for now, is its originality. For his final major companion exit, Steve Moffat chose to do something different, and boy did he pull it off. The character literally gets shot in the chest and cyber converted in the first half of the story. I mean, Jesus Christ. That's insanely dark and twisted, and it made for some incredibly compelling and devastating television. Having a companion be converted by the Cybermen is the kind of genius idea that you have to wonder why it wasn't done until now. And all of that continued into the second part of the story, where something was actually done with the idea of Bill Potts as a Cyberman. It wasn't just a shock value revelation for the end of part 1, they actually did something with it, which makes it that much more meaningful. We get to spend time with her as she deals with the fact that she isn't really human anymore, at least not in the way that she used to be. That was all really good and worked very well for me, but I also love the way that Steve Moffat takes this tragic situation and makes it just a little bit more heartbreaking, as Bill leaves the Doctor alone in his TARDIS thinking that he's gone, and he never knows what happens to her either. The fact that they both go off in separate directions at the end of this one just makes the entire thing that much more difficult, because there was the opportunity for them to both find out that the other one turned out okay enough in the end, with the Doctor regenerating and Bill going on a ghost adventure with Heather, but instead they will never know, which I absolutely love. And as far as her appearance in Twice Upon a Time, like Nardole and really that whole story, I consider it to be a bit more of a coda. It's not a necessary addition to the show, you could have ended it earlier, but it adds on to what was already there in a nice way, giving you just a good final note to leave off on. Obviously it's not the real Bill in this episode, but for all intents and purposes, it's her, and I like the final note that she has with this Doctor. Clara's exit is a little more complicated than some, but I am referring to everything that happened to her in the final 3 episodes of Series 9 because it all goes together. There's definitely some people that only like the initial exit she has in Face the Raven and aren't keen on how it develops in Hellbent, but I'm definitely going to push back on the idea that the latter of those episodes in any way undermined what came before it, because from my perspective, it merely added to it and made the situation even more tragic. I can only go over so much of Clara's arc and exit, but I will say that having a character who wanted to be like the Doctor to the point that it resulted in their demise is one of the most interesting and well executed concepts the show has ever attempted with a companion. To me, that was brilliantly handled throughout Series 8 and especially Series 9, culminating with a brilliant storyline in which her attempting to solve this situation on her own ends in her death as she faces the Raven. Hellbent takes this and says, what if the Doctor loses it, and finally, after being toyed with by the Time Lords for billions of years, forces them to bring back Clara. This is something that we've never really seen the show attempt before, at least not in this way, and this episode highlights exactly why this is something the Doctor cannot and should not ever do. It doesn't retcon the death that came before, that death still happens at a later point. What it does instead is twists the dagger a little bit more as Clara confronts the Doctor about how long he waited in the confession dial, and we see them find that they cannot be together. Their relationship is not a healthy one, and sadly they have to make the decision to not travel together. It's just the way that it has to be. You can criticize the hybrid storyline all you want, but I don't ever want to hear somebody say that the show never gave an answer as to who the hybrid actually is, because they did. It's the Doctor and Clara. That's what the whole episode was all about. Hell, that's what the whole season was about. Their toxic relationship and why they cannot travel together, because that is what it leads to. It's completely unique and utterly heartbreaking to see this portrayed on screen, and I loved almost everywhere they took this storyline, and how it led directly into Clara's goodbye was just perfect for me. Forcing the Doctor to not remember Clara and seeing everything that happened in Hellbent, it just made the events of Face the Raven even more tragic as the Doctor continues about his travels, forced never to remember her truly. He can look her right in the eyes and just not know who she is. It's heartbreaking, and I adore what was done with this utterly unique exit for a Doctor Who companion. Donna's exit from the show was nothing short of stellar. She's not my favorite companion on this list, I would put multiple others above her, but the tragedy of her exit was everything you could hope for from a Doctor Who companion's goodbye. When Russell T Davies wanted to, he could just open your tear ducts wide open and make you feel something. And that's the reason this one is so high on this list. The final 10 or so minutes of Journey's End always crushes my heart. Seeing Donna be forced to forget all of her adventures with her best friend without even getting a choice as to whether or not she can choose to die with those memories or live without them. I think the fact that she doesn't even get to say no to this, but desperately wants to, and the Doctor is forced to take her memories to save her life, thus making her forget their friendship entirely, that is what makes this one so unbelievably hard to watch. I almost always cry while watching this scene because all of the elements are just put together so well and executed in the perfect way. It also helps this one that the goodbye itself is the note that the episode decides to end on, and the season actually. There's no additional scene intended to lead into the Christmas special. Seeing the Doctor completely dejected inside of his TARDIS is where we leave the story, and to me, that is the perfect way to end what is one of the absolute best exits for a companion of the entire modern era of the show. Rose was the first companion to exit from modern era Doctor Who, and if you ask me, they have yet to top it. I've always liked Rose as a companion. I thought she was great with Eccleston's Doctor and great with Tennant's as well. So what is it about her leaving the show that puts it to the very top of the ranking? While I'm not entirely sure what tips it over the edge for me, there are a number of things that help to make this one as heartbreaking as it is. I think that making the goodbye last for a fair amount of time, making it actually feel like a significant part of this adventure definitely helps. When Rose gets trapped in the other dimension, that's all the story is about from there until just about the very end. This is now the only thing that matters, and it also improved the actual story that the exit was in because it showed that Tennant and Rose weren't able to make it out okay every time. They had some close calls this season, and here at the end we see that this or something like this was probably always destined to happen. The tragedy of these two characters not being able to be with one another after all of the adventures they'd gone through, not over just series 2 but series 1 as well, it always gets to me. Another thing that makes this instance unique is that there is an implied romantic element between these two characters. It's never made explicitly clear what's going on, but it is hinted at throughout series 2 in ways that are hard to refute. I don't know if that makes it more tragic than Donna's goodbye, for example, but it does at least make it a little bit more unique and stand out on its own as something different, which I do appreciate. And having it take place over these two different scenes worked quite well too, as the Doctor manages to find a way to actually say goodbye to Rose. And of course, him not even being able to say those words to her makes the whole thing that much more devastating. And on top of that, the music throughout this entire sequence is nothing short of perfect, and truly sells this as arguably the single most tragic moment in the entirety of the show. And that's it. There's my ranking of the exits for modern era Doctor Who companions. This was a very difficult list to put together, but I did my absolute best to keep it as accurate to my feelings towards these different exits as possible. Feel free to leave your ranking down in the comments if you feel like doing so. I would love to know what you think, and I do hope to see you around soon for more Doctor Who reviews and rankings if you're interested. And if not, that is absolutely fine, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. Take care, and have a lovely week. Forcing the Doctor to not remember Clara and seeing everything that happened in Hellbent, it just made the events of Face the Raisin... Face the Raisin? Shit.